I have sat on the bench for decades, and in that time, I have seen every shape and shadow of human arrogance. I have seen old money walk through those heavy wooden doors, expecting the law to bow to a family trust. I have seen corporate executives who believed a sharp suit and a high hourly billing rate could rewrite reality. But recently, a new kind of currency has entered my courtroom. It is a currency built entirely on digital validation. A small claims court is a mirror reflecting society's shifting values. That Thursday morning, the mirror reflected something deeply troubling. The docket listed a dispute over property damage. A local bakery owner, a woman who had spent 30 years waking up at 4 in the morning to knead dough, was suing a 22-year-old man for $3,000. On paper, it was a straightforward tort. But the law is not just about paper. When the defendant walked in, he did not walk with the nervous hesitation of someone facing justice. He strolled. I will call him Chase. He carried himself with the loose, unbothered posture of someone who treats the physical world as a mere backdrop for his own broadcast. He attempted to bring a friend with a camera into my courtroom. I had the bailiff escort the friend out immediately. Chase looked genuinely confused. To him, a room without a camera was a room that didn't matter. I turned my attention to the plaintiff, Mrs. Higgins. She was a woman of profound dignity, her hands worn from honest labor. She explained that Chase had come into her shop, filmed a prank involving destroying custom cakes, and walked out laughing. He promised his viewers he would pay her double, but the money never came. I looked at Chase and asked a simple question. Did you destroy this woman's property? He did not look ashamed. Instead, he smiled a practiced smile, with the absolute certainty of a young man who has never been told no outside of a comment section. He said, "Your Honor, do you know who I am? I have 2 million followers." The silence that followed his statement was profound. It was not the silence of awe. It was the silence of a room collectively holding its breath, waiting for a storm to break. Mrs. Higgins looked at him, her expression a mixture of confusion and sorrow. She did not know what a follower count was, nor did she care. She only knew her display case was smashed and her week's profit was gone. I let the silence stretch. I have found that silence is often the best weapon against someone who is used to constant noise, constant validation, and the endless scroll of immediate feedback. Chase shifted his weight. His smirk wavered slightly, the first crack in his digital armor. He was waiting for me to react, perhaps to be impressed, or at least to acknowledge his perceived importance. 2 million, I repeated, my voice deliberately flat. I leaned forward, resting my hands on the bench. 2 million people watch you exist. Yes, Your Honor, he said, his confidence returning slightly. It's a brand, it's business. And do these 2 million people? I asked, my tone sharp enough to cut glass. Do they pay your rent? Do they pay for the flour and the sugar that Mrs. Higgins buys every Tuesday? Do they sweep the floor of her bakery at 5 in the evening when her back aches? Chase blinked. That's not how it works. No, I agreed, it is not. Because in this room, Mr. Chase, your brand has absolutely zero exchange rate. I do not care if you have 2 million followers or 2 followers. In this room, you are not an influencer. You are a 22-year-old man who walked into a woman's place of business, destroyed her property for a cheap laugh, and refused to take responsibility. You thought your digital clout was a shield against real-world consequences. I looked at him, truly looked at him, past the expensive sneakers and the carefully styled hair. I saw a young man who had been rewarded so consistently for bad behavior online that his moral compass had completely demagnetized. He had confused attention with character and popularity with immunity. You asked me if I know who you are, I said, leaning back. I know exactly who you are. You are a nuisance disguised as a celebrity. And today, the disguise comes off. Your Honor, Chase's attorney began, stepping forward for the first time. Up until this moment, he had been a silent, highly paid accessory. My client is an entertainer. The incident in question was a comedic sketch, protected under the premise of parody. He intended no malice, and he did promise to compensate Mrs. Higgins, which he is prepared to do today. A comedic sketch, I repeated. The phrase tasted metallic and absurd in my mouth. I looked at the attorney, a man old enough to know better, defending a boy young enough to learn something. Counselor, a sketch is rehearsed. A sketch implies consent. What your client performed was vandalism filmed on a smartphone. Do not dress up property damage in the vocabulary of Hollywood. I motioned to the bailiff to present the evidence exhibit. It was a tablet containing the video Chase had posted. I had watched it in my chambers earlier that morning, but seeing it play out in the courtroom, right in front of the woman whose life it had disrupted, changed the gravity of the images. In the video, Chase walked into the bakery. Mrs. Higgins was behind the counter, smiling, arranging pastries. Chase asked for a custom wedding cake. When she brought out a tiered masterpiece, something she later testified took 8 hours to create, he grabbed it with both hands and threw it onto the floor. The frosting splattered across the linoleum. Mrs. Higgins let out a sharp cry of shock. Chase turned to the camera, laughed loudly, yelled his catchphrase, and ran out the door. The video had garnered 3.5 million views. I paused the video on Mrs. Higgins' face. It was frozen in a mask of sheer distress. "Look at the screen, Mr. Chase," I commanded. He hesitated, then glanced at the tablet. I said, "Look at it," I repeated, my voice rising just enough to fill the corners of the room. "That is not a punchline. That is an artisan watching 8 hours of her meticulous labor, of her livelihood, destroyed in 2 seconds for your amusement. You call that entertainment?" "It was just a prank," Chase muttered, crossing his arms defensive. "People do it all the time online. She was supposed to get exposure." I tagged her bakery. "You know how much advertising like that costs?" The sheer density of his ignorance was almost palpable. He truly believed he had done her a favor. He believed that the currency of attention outweighed the reality of a ruined floor and a destroyed product. "Exposure," I said the word slowly, dissecting it. "Mrs. Higgins, did you ask for exposure?" "No, Your Honor," she said, her voice shaking slightly but holding firm. "I asked him to pay for the cake. I have rent due. I have suppliers to pay. Exposure does not pay the flour mill." I turned back to Chase. The smirk was gone now, replaced by a defensive scowl. The digital armor was cracking, revealing the hollow architecture beneath. "Your Honor," the attorney interjected again, his voice tighter this time, sensing the shift in the room's atmosphere. "My client is prepared to write a check right now for the $3,000. We ask that the court accept this restitution and dismiss the claim, allowing all parties to move on." It was the classic maneuver of the privileged. Throw money at the problem until it goes away. Money, to them, is not a representation of labor or time. It is simply an eraser for bad decisions. "A check," I said. I looked from the attorney back to Chase. "You want to write a check, Mr. Chase?" "Yeah," Chase said, a small, arrogant smile creeping back onto his face. He reached into his designer jacket and pulled out a leather checkbook. "Like I said in the video, I'll pay her double. 6,000. Let's just wrap this up. My dad always says, if money can fix it, it's not a real problem." The room went completely still. It was the kind of stillness that precedes a lightning strike. "Your father says that," I repeated quietly. "Yes, Your Honor. He's Richard Sterling." He paused, waiting for the name to land, waiting for the invisible doors of deference to open. When I did not react, he elaborated, a hint of impatience in his voice. "Sterling Real Estate? He owns half the commercial properties on the East Side." "I am aware of who Richard Sterling is," I said, "and I am aware of the properties he owns. What I am trying to understand is why you believe his real estate portfolio gives you the right to vandalize a bakery and treat this courtroom like an inconvenience." "I'm just saying," Chase leaned on the podium, dropping any pretense of respect. $6,000 is a lot of money to her. It's nothing to me. So take the check, and we're good, right?" He was no longer just an influencer trying to protect his brand. He was a wealthy son deploying his ultimate safety net. He believed that the amount written on a piece of paper could substitute for genuine accountability. He looked at me, waiting for me to nod, to take the transaction, to validate the lesson his father had supposedly taught him. Instead, I looked past him, to the back of the courtroom. The heavy wooden doors had opened quietly during his exchange. A man in a sharp tailored suit had walked in and stood silently, listening. It was Richard Sterling. Richard Sterling did not look like a man accustomed to apologizing. He had the rigid posture and sharp gaze of someone who spent his life commanding rooms much larger and more expensive than mine. He walked past the gallery, past Mrs. Higgins, and stopped right behind his son. Chase turned, his face lighting up with the sudden, profound relief of a child who has just been rescued from a consequence. "Dad," he said, his voice instantly losing its bravado, slipping into a whiny cadence, Tell the judge to just take the check." Mr. Sterling did not look at his son. He looked directly at me. "Your Honor," he said. His voice was deep, resonant, and entirely stripped of warmth. "I apologize for the interruption." "Mr. Sterling," I acknowledged him. Your son was just explaining how your real estate portfolio provides him with a blanket immunity from civil liability. I was waiting to hear the legal precedent for that. Chase puffed out his chest slightly. I told you he... Shut up, Mr. Sterling said. He didn't yell. The words dropped like anvils onto the polished wood of the floor. The effect was immediate. Chase flinched, his jaw clicking shut, the color draining from his face. The influencer with 2 million followers disappeared, replaced by a terrified boy. Mr. Sterling finally turned to look at the tablet resting on the evidence table. The video of his son destroying the cake was paused, Mrs. Higgins' face frozen in distress. He stared at it for a long, agonizing moment. I watched the muscles in his jaw tighten. He turned away from the screen and looked at Mrs. Higgins. "Ma'am," he said, and for the first time I heard a tremor in his voice. "I am profoundly sorry for what my son did to your business. It is inexcusable." Then he turned back to me. The courtroom was silent enough to hear a pin drop. The attorney, sensing the catastrophic shift, opened his mouth to object, but Mr. Sterling held up a hand, silencing him instantly. "Your Honor," Mr. Sterling said, his eyes meeting mine with a heavy, cold clarity. "Do not accept his check." Chase let out a strangled sound, a mix of shock and betrayal. "Dad, what are you doing? I can pay for it." "You aren't paying for anything with my money," Mr. Sterling snapped, turning his full, terrifying attention onto his son. "You think you can act like a vandal, humiliate a hardworking woman, and then write a check to make it disappear? You think that's what power is?" He looked back at the bench. The twist was absolute. The shield of privilege had not just failed, it had actively turned into the sword of consequence. "Your Honor," he continued, his voice steady again, "I ask the court to hold him fully accountable. No deals, no buyouts. I will not pay this judgment. Let him face the reality he has been hiding from." The courtroom didn't just go silent. It felt as though the air had been vacuumed out of the room. Chase stood motionless, his mouth slightly open, the checkbook still clutched in his hand like a useless toy. He looked at his father, searching for a signal, a wink, a secret code that would reveal this was all just part of a script, part of a game he was supposed to win. But Richard Sterling was not looking at his son. He was looking at me, his face a mask of weary resolve. "My son has spent the last 3 years confusing digital applause with human consequence," Mr. Sterling said, his voice cutting through the quiet. "He thinks because people watch him, he is important. He thinks because he can afford to pay for damages, he is untouchable. He is wrong. And I am, in no small part, responsible for him believing that." Chase finally found his voice, a frantic whisper. "Dad, don't do this. I'm your son. You can't let her do this to me." "I am not letting her do anything to you," Mr. Sterling replied, turning to look at his son for the first time since he entered. His gaze was icy. "You did this to yourself. You walked into that bakery. You put a camera in that woman's face, and you destroyed her hard work for a click. You didn't do that as a Sterling. You did that as a child who has never been forced to see the world outside of his own reflection." I watched Chase deflate. The ego, the bluster, the carefully curated influencer persona, it all peeled away, revealing a scared, small young man underneath. He looked at the gallery, at the people who had viewed him as a king, and saw only strangers staring back with judgment. "I have spent my life building a name," Mr. Sterling continued, turning back to the bench. "I did not build it so it could be used as a blunt instrument to crush people like Mrs. Higgins. Your Honor, I ask that you hold him to the full extent of the law. Do not reduce the fine. Do not offer a plea deal for community service that he can film for his own channel. Let him face the consequences he thinks he can buy his way out of." I looked at the young man, then at the father. It was a rare, raw moment of parenting, not the kind that shields, but the kind that shatters a delusion to save a soul. "Mr. Chase," I said, my voice resonating in the quiet chamber, "you came here expecting a transaction. You thought your name and your following were the keys to the kingdom. You were mistaken. In this courtroom, the only thing that has currency is the truth of your conduct. Mr. Sterling, I have seen many parents come into this court trying to bribe, lie, or deflect to save their children from their own choices. You have done the opposite. You have chosen the hard road of integrity. I respect that. You may take your seat." I turned my gaze back to Chase, who looked like a deer caught in high beams. "Mr. Chase, take your hands off the podium and look at me. Your business, as you call it, is over for the day. Mrs. Higgins, the court finds in your favor. Judgment for the plaintiff in the amount of $3,000 for the damage caused plus an additional $5,000 in punitive damages for your willful, malicious destruction of private property. You will pay this amount in full by 5 o'clock today, or the court will issue a bench warrant for your arrest. Chase's face paled. 5,000? I don't. I mean, that's not in the budget. I don't care about your budget, I snapped, leaning over the bench. You destroyed a life's work for a laugh. That laughter has a price, and today you are paying it. But that is not all. You are so fond of creating content that you forgot the basic human decency required to live in a civilized society. For the next 90 days, every Saturday, you will report to Mrs. Higgins' bakery at 5 in the morning. You will scrub the floors, you will wash the dishes, and you will assist her with the manual labor required to maintain her shop. No cameras, no pranking, no social media. You will provide the labor you robbed her of. 90 days? That's insane. I have events to go to, Chase shouted, his composure shattering completely. You have a sentence to serve, I corrected him. And let me be crystal clear. If I hear one word about this being filmed, or if you show up with a single camera, I will see you in jail. Your 2 million followers cannot save you from the reality of your own actions. You wanted to be famous? You will be famous for being the young man who learned, in this courtroom, that your name and your digital clout are completely worthless compared to character. The courtroom was silent. Even the court reporter had stopped typing. I looked at Mrs. Higgins, who was finally exhaling, the tension of the last few months draining from her shoulders. I looked at Mr. Sterling, who nodded once, a silent acknowledgement of the debt his son owed. Court is adjourned, I said, rising from the bench. And Mr. Chase, don't bother posting about this. If you do, you'll be back here, and the next sentence won't be nearly as forgiving. The final bang of my gavel echoed through the courtroom like a gunshot. It was over. The checkbook in Chase's hand was useless, and his frantic attempts to negotiate were silenced by the finality of the law. I watched as the bailiff approached him. There was no more smirk, no more posturing, no more, "Do you know who I am?" Just a young man standing in the stark, unforgiving light of a courtroom, stripped of his digital armor. He looked at his father one last time, a desperate, silent plea for a rescue that wasn't coming. Richard Sterling didn't look back. He turned on his heel and walked out of the courtroom, his posture rigid, leaving his son to face the consequences he had orchestrated. It was the most honest thing I had seen a father do in years. He wasn't abandoning his son. He was saving him from a life built on a foundation of sand. I sat back in my chair, the rush of the case beginning to fade into the familiar rhythm of the bench. People think justice is about the result, the fine, the jail time, the order. But as I watched Chase being led away to process his community service details, I knew justice was about the moment of realization. It was the crack in the facade. It was the first time in his life that someone told him no and meant it. I don't know if Chase learned his lesson. Perhaps he will emerge from these 90 days as a better man, one who understands that dignity is earned through service, not through a lens. Perhaps he will go right back to his cameras and his followers, unchanged and unrepentant. But that is no longer my business. My role is to hold up the mirror. What they choose to look at when they see their own reflection is up to them. As the gallery cleared and the next case was called, I thought about the thousands of people watching through screens. If this story changed even one person's mind about what true power is, then it was worth the time. Character is not what you show the world. It is what remains when the world stops watching. And on this day, in this room, for one brief, uncomfortable moment, the world stopped watching, and reality finally stood in the light. The docket closed. I stood up, walked to my chambers, and prepared for the next file. Because there is always another case, always another lesson, and always another opportunity for justice to do its job. Character is the only currency that never devalues, and in a world obsessed with followers, that is the truth that matters most.